Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I am your associate producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and I will be your host guiding us through this session today. And I'm joined by one of our artistic producers, Ryan Borochovitz. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jill. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So today, Ryan and I are going to be unpacking Art in Association with Crow's Theatre, their Canadian premiere production of Gloria by Branden Jacobs-Jenkins, directed by Canadian icon André Sills. So before we get into that, though, Ryan, I'm going to take us through our intros. So what are you sipping on today? What's in your cup, Ryan?
Oh, well, I have my classic The Cup with Cup of Hemlock logo here on the back, and
Nice.
I am drinking water out of it.
Wonderful. Yes, stay hydrated. I also have my canteen of water if need be. I should be taking your advice, but I am on my second coffee today.
It's no advice. Have whatever you want.
I have this Belgian chocolate iced coffee. And it's
that
in a
kind of,
tumbler, too.
yeah, that kind of looks like Kendra, the character in the play, drank coffee out of something kind of like that. So
Exactly.
you came prepared.
Yes, I did. There's so much to unpack in this. I will just cat's out of the bag for me. Stunning performance and production.
Agreed.
I will give it a 10 out of 10 on my end. I guess before we kind of unpack this particular production, because this episode is going out while the run is still happening, we do want to sort of give you a basic rundown description of the show, and then we will sort of put in a spoiler alert guidepost. So for any of our viewers or listeners that want to go see the show for themselves and don't want any of the information that Ryan and I will be unpacking to be spoiled, you will be warned. So I guess before we get to that spoiler alert section, Ryan, I think we owe it to our viewers, listeners. Let's just describe this play or this production in a generalized way. I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, sure. It's going to be tough because a lot happens in this, and I think a lot of twists and turns and surprises, and you kind of, I would encourage anyone going to see this to not Google like what happens or not know the plot. I think it's kind of a worthwhile ride to be there with the surprises. There's a few different ways, I guess we could try to describe it in a non-spoilery way. There is a description on the Crow's website. There's also, just this morning, I was at the U of T library and I picked up a little copy of the script here, and it has a little blurb on the back. So maybe let's start by reading that and see,
Sure.
Because I vetted this. This is a non-spoilery kind of description. I wasn't just going to read this not knowing what it said and then be very surprised. Oh my God, they spoil everything. But,
Right.
But let's
lay it on us. What's the blurb say?
The blurb says, finalist for the 2016 Pulitzer Prize. Ain't that interesting and like good prestige there? It's a shame it didn't win. This funny, trenchant, and powerful play follows an ambitious group of editorial assistants at a notorious Manhattan magazine, each of whom hopes for a starry life of letters and a book deal before they turn 30. But when an ordinary humdrum workday becomes anything but, the stakes for who will get to tell their own story become higher than ever. That's all we get on the back of the script. Thoughts on that?
That's, having not read that, but having just seen the play, that's not a lot, which is good. Yes, it's enough. It's enough to have you crack the spine on the play. It's enough to have you enter the theater doors, but there's a lot more to tune into.
And I think whoever wrote that blurb definitely knew what we just said, that you want to go into this play knowing as little as possible. There are some things in that description that certainly don't do the big spoilers, but I think maybe give up the game a little more than I would also like. And I'm not going to say which ones until we get into spoiler zone, because, for the benefit of those who may or may not still be surprised by what they see. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting description. It sets up the type of environment we're in. This is a modern workplace that we have all these. It's a magazine, so we're in the publishing industry. We have all these folks that are interested in writing, want to have book deals before they're 30 is an interesting piece of information here. And there's going to be some kind of interesting day that makes up a lot of the drama of this play. And that's all we're left with. And I'm curious to you, Jill, now you've obviously seen the production because we just saw it last night, but at time of recording. But
Right.
Does that description give you enough to sink your teeth into that you're like, oh, I really want to see this? It just knowing that if you didn't know that BJJ wrote it, if you didn't know that André was directing it, like, what do you get just from that?
I think so too. I think that's definitely enough for me. I mean, it helps that it's BJJ and it helps that it's André Sills and the Crows too. I've always, all the productions I've seen with Crows have been like 10 out of 10s in my opinion. But yeah, similar to you, Ryan, I kind of went into this whole experience blind. I kind of read a little bit further into what it might be about. And this isn't a spoiler alert, but there is like violence and gunshots used in the production. I think that's something that we can tell our viewers
and, Crows has
and
those
listeners.
content
And
warnings
Crows has those,
in the front lobby, so know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and I guess just structurally, it's it's a play that has a lot of like two-handed scenes. There you kind of get little tidbits of character background and information throughout the entire arc of the piece. There's several different time periods that you kind of glaze through. And it's proscenium style seating. The audience is sitting in a quite raked position, sort of looking on at the space. And yeah, that's kind of all I want to leave with there.
Like I think just the fact that for those who aren't familiar with Branden Jacobs-Jenkins' other work, like he's probably best known for An Octoroon. He also wrote Appropriate or Appropriate, depending on which pronunciation you prefer to go with. And Everybody, the adaptation of Everyman that's actually going to be at the Shaw Festival this summer, which I think might also be a Canadian premiere, but don't quote me on that in case it's incorrect. But yeah, An Octoroon, which many people saw at the Shaw Festival a few seasons ago, and André played a prominent lead role in that, so that's very interesting. He actually played BJJ as himself as the characters in the play. It's a wonderful piece, and I think that for the most part is the main work of his that I had in my head going into this, and I was quite surprised at what we got here. Not because it wasn't equally brilliant, but as that other piece, but because I do think that he's definitely showing a very diverse career and catalog of plays that he's putting out here. He's not necessarily pigeonholing himself into, I write plays that are like this, or I write plays that are just adaptations of older works like Everybody and An Octoroon are. Like, this is very contemporary, very interesting feel, and quite different. And perhaps something we'll unpack a little more later, that race plays an interesting role in a lot of his works. He is an African-American playwright, and it's not necessarily as prominent in this one as you might expect. There's certainly things we can unpack, but much like, in the prologue to An Octoroon, when he kind of complains, or the version of himself in the play complains about how he can't write anything without people wanting to make it about race, I think this play is a very good refutation of course, there will always be elements of race in his plays because, that's just the way he sees the world, very rightly so. But this isn't a play that has to be reducible to that, the way that he complains a play he wrote about talking animals became interpreted that way in the introduction. And then we have the Brer Rabbit character that comes out to kind of manifest that in An Octoroon. Of course, I'm not spoiling Gloria right now. Yeah. Sorry, I just think that's a fun detail, and that's a great play too, that hopefully we can review a pro shot of that one day, maybe.
Yes.
If ever there was one. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, and I talked about this in my interview with André, is I had the opportunity to see An Octoroon. And so just kind of what you brought to the table there of how this piece is so different compared to that. And I totally agree. Like, that's the one thing, having seen An Octoroon and coming in to see this one, I was kind of expecting the same kind of structure and vibe that An Octoroon was. And it, I guess, kind of spoiler alert, it's not. So if folks have seen An Octoroon and go to see this,
he's clearly trying interesting new things with style, and no two plays of his, I think, are doing the same thing, and he's being experimental. Like Carol Churchill, you recently just hosted our episode on Top Girls, is also very famous for no two plays. All of her plays are experimental, but no two are experimental in the same way, and I think BJJ is definitely following in that type of pattern or footsteps. And another reason why I'm very excited that I just got the script of this, having just seen the production last night, is An Octoroon has some of the funniest stage directions I've ever read in my life, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing if this has the same. So won't be able to comment on that in this episode because I've yet to read it, but that's just for myself, something I'm curious about.
Totally. Just to kind of pick up something you said of Carol Churchill's experimental plays, it's very interesting that you say that too, because Top Girls, which we just unpacked, has sort of like 3 scenarios, 3 situations, 3 time periods. And Gloria, you can gauge this by just reading the play too. So again, not a spoiler, but there's 3 sort of time periods, time spans in this piece too.
Yeah.
But I can feel us leaking a little bit towards spoiler land.
So any last appraisal thoughts before we, anything like that you feel like non-spoilery you want to say before we put up that shield?
I just think folks have to go see this.
Yeah.
The run is happening now when this episode is being released, and it runs until March 20th, 2022 at the Streetcar Crow's Nest, Crow's Theatre's location on Carla Avenue in Toronto. Go to their website, grab your tickets. You will not be disappointed. Live theater is back, folks. We got to support the arts. And this piece has a lot to talk about, the sort of environments that we are maybe stepping back into office spaces, stepping back into human connection, right? Breaking out of isolation that the pandemic has sort of cubicled us into. And so I think this piece is just, for the theater goer and for non-theater goers, this is a piece to definitely put on your radar. Yeah. So I wanted to plug that.
Yeah. After this point, everything we will say may or may not include spoilers. So if you want to just go in surprised, please stop watching this video now or this podcast episode, or put it on mute and let it play so we get the analytics. You do you, but we also encourage you to come back after you've seen the show and see what we have to say about it. And maybe you will agree, disagree, get in those comments and tell us.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
See you then.
See you then. Spoiler alert, shield, activate.
do.
Okay, great. So we're in it now. We are into unpacking this production.
Gloria shoots a lot of people.
Yeah. Wow.
We're coming out. Spoiler gate. Okay, so this is a play about an office shooting. Yeah. Now, I'm curious because obviously for content warning purposes, Crows needed to kind of inform the audience that this is the kind of thing that they would be in store for, because not everybody is comfortable attending plays with that kind of thing, and a lot of people do have very legitimate sensitivities to it. But I feel like with the description we have there of this office setting and knowing that there is gunfire, I think a lot of people might be able to guess where this is going. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think so. But I think that's something that couldn't be avoided, right? And here's the thing is, like I said, going into the production, I had kind of read out a little bit about it, so I wasn't really shocked. But yeah, I guess if folks kind of stumble upon Crows, or like, we want to see a show tonight, and it happens to be gunshots, and then here's the storyline of what you're watching. I guess it could have happened like outside of the office, right? It could have happened. I don't know, it could happen off stage, right? Because it's just gunshots will be heard.
Right.
But quite honestly, you have the character come in and you see it's obviously a prop gun, but you see the kickback firing of the shots that are way on stage, pretty well, just like, off,
and it's
off
a loud
center.
prop gun
And it's very loud. I actually had goosebumps all over my body and like, I got emotional because it was very, like, it was a very visceral moment. And then that sort of concluded our act, which is neat because I'm not really spoiling kind of the unfurling of
we can spoil anything right now. The spoiler shield is up.
True. But it threw us into darkness. And it was a very long, like I've said this before, I actually said it in the Top Girls panel of like, we were meant to sit in the shit. We actually did sit in the shit. We sat in complete darkness as the audience until there was a slow fade up and we were brought into intermission. So there were so many emotions going on. I was scared. I was like, holy crap, that just happened. It was, very moving.
Yeah. So now we can probably take this opportunity to talk more about the specifics of the plot. Obviously, comedically got in there. Do you want to take a stab at this, or do you want me to?
Sure. So yeah, so like I was saying, actually, I think this would be a good place to start for like the structure of the piece. So all of Act 1 happens, as Brian was mentioning earlier, like in the publishing magazine office. And it's sort of like our main space is a chunk of the office. So there's like fact checking, there's copying, there's other hallways of the office. But what we're in is sort of the editing section of the office. And you have a couple employees, an intern, you have the boss behind a closed door that we don't see in this first act, and we have like a receptionist. And they're talking not about their job. They're talking about each other. They're talking about gossip. They're talking about, they're talking at each other as opposed to with each other, in not a very friendly way or supportive way. And then we get into, so the end of that whole section ends with the shooting. So that's the kind of common ground is there's a woman in the office by the name of Gloria, who is kind of seen as like the office oddball. Folks don't really interact with her. They think she's weird. It's essentially adult bullying. And we hear that Dean, one of the coworkers, attended Gloria had a housewarming party, and he went, but no one else did. And he stumbles in hungover from the party, and that kind of cracks open our plot. So then the end of that act is Gloria going around the office killing folks. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was she maimed 18 and killed 10 people.
I think, yeah, that sounds correct.
And it ends with her confronting or coming face to face with Dean and saying she's not going to kill him. And because he had always been nice to her, he had attended her party. Thank you, sort of. And then Gloria kills herself. And then we are brought into Act 2, which I kind of saw as two sections. So the first one, we open up on a cafe, Starbucks, and we get sort of two-hander conversations going on between characters of Dean and Kendra, and then Nan and Sasha. And they're talking about how all of these people have in their brains and on the page a memoir of the shooting. And again, you're right back to that cutthroatedness of like whose copy is going to be published, or is it your prerogative to tell this story, or like why can't I talk about this? And so then that sort of spirals us to the last chunk of the play, the second half of Act 2, where we are now in a TV film office. That's a bit more like hipstery, if you will, and community office space building. And we find out that this TV film company is taking Nan, one of our characters who put forth a memoir script, and wanting to bring it into a TV show or take it further into a film. So that's like the bare bones, I guess, of plot. Ryan, I don't know if you want to add.
No, that was
like
excellent.
15 minutes of our episode of like, this is exactly what the play is.
No, honestly, that was a very like nice. It sounded stringy, but it was like a concise way of going through the kind of twists and turns. I would have done it probably 3 times as long with more character specifics, because I just want to talk about all of them because they're so interesting. But no, I love the way you kind of encapsulated all of that, and is this kind of journey from the stuff that happens before the event and the immediate like prior to it, and then we go to intermission on this big, play defining but also life defining event for all these people. And then the aftermath is all about that experience's journey from, something that happens to memory, to published book, to eventually television series, and following the characters as they navigate that journey. And there's a lot of interesting characters, and they all have different perspectives on these things. I don't know. Do you want to dive right into that now, or did you have other thoughts about broad strokes of the plot first?
No, I think that's a great launch pad of, should we talk about double casting and how
let's
characters throughout the piece are double or sometimes triply casted. And having Ryan having the copy of the play has confirmed that the production that we just saw follows the usual double triple casting. So we have Gloria and Nan is played by the same actor.
Deborah Drakeford.
Deborah Drakeford. Yep. Lauren's played by González-Vío.
Notably the only character to not be double cast, and maybe we'll talk about that in a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Annie, Sasha, Callie is a character package played by the actor Jonelle Gunderson. And then we have Miles Sean Rashad, that is played by Savion Roach. And then Dean Devon, played by Nabil Trabulsi, and Kendra Jenna, played by Athena Caitlin Trin. Apologies, folks, if I mispronounced any of your names.
Wonderful.
So that was
you were all great.
My gosh. Like, so good.
Yeah.
The chemistry of this cast was phenomenal. And like we'll get into it too, but this, I guess, just kind of getting into it now, the piece asks for, it's a satire, right? Like that's the thing. It's dealing with, we've kind of mapped it out of like, it's an office shooting and there's these big philosophical concepts of like the, human connection and Lord of the Flies sort of vibes, if you will, but there's a lot of comedy baked into this. And I think that's they each of them play that so well and encapsulating just kind of like your average office folk humor or, but then it's pivoted and swiveled. And a lot of this is even in the staging. Thank you, André, where you'll have conversations kind of happening as two-handers or like water cooler conversations, if you will. And then the character pivots out and sort of goes on these trance-like monologues talking about their experience or some chunk of human experience or something they're aspiring for in the future or something that's happened to them in the past. So to me, it kind of had like a magic realism tinge a little bit because you were watching their sort of like private office conversations happening. And then they would take a thought out and at the audience. It wasn't like they were breaking the fourth wall, but it was very much at that point as the audience, I was like,
it was directed outward. Yeah,
exactly. So I was like, oh, we're in it now. Like we're kind of like being brought along this experience. So I thought that was awesome on staging part. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, like I definitely agree because it never felt like an explicit fourth wall break, but it always was this directed outward. And yeah, it does give you the feel that you, the audience, are in the office with them. And something that I also really liked about these details is it wasn't like a desire under the elms. This is my inner thoughts and everyone else pauses so I can tell you what I'm thinking. Like this is very much, they're having the conversations with each other, but when somebody just goes on a thought for a long time, suddenly that thought cannot be contained by the mimetic seal anymore and it sort of breaks outward, but it's still for the benefit of the other characters they're talking to. Although we could also argue that because they're going on so long and sharing so much and getting so deep into themselves, like, are they saying this to communicate something to the other characters, or do they just get on these tangents and kind of have to release it all? But we never get the sense that time has stopped and we are just, here's what I would tell you that I don't want anyone else to hear, audience. Like,
well, yeah, absolutely. And I think we contextually, even in this production, when Athena, who played Kendra, the first sort of iterance of this is when she kind of goes on that monologue. She showed up late to work. She went shopping before work. She goes on this monologue. And then when she's done, and it is a monologue, like, like about the human experience, questioning positions, kind of like, all of these monologues have a very similar like flavor. That's why but sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, that's the one about like the kind of economy in the office and the lack of turnover and this sort of giving your life to something that will promise no upward mobility. And like she really goes on about those themes for a while. Sorry, go on. Yeah,
and then Dean, the character of Dean goes like, Kendra, like, are you something that, this is paraphrased, but like, are you done monologuing about, something that's not work? And it's kind of like they're not hearing each other, right? Like, and they're listening, but like, what is listening? And I think that's a whole theme of this piece, right? And we get that a lot in coming full circle back to Lauren, the played by Carlos González-Vío, and Lauren's the only person that isn't double casted. And he actually says, he's the character that kind of like says what is happening of we're not communicating with each other in an office space. Like he actually warns the character Annie, like, look out for, folks in this environment to kind of turn your brain off. He's kind of like, we should be connecting as humans, like we work with each other, but we don't know anything about each other. He's the one that's like, darn, I had to miss Gloria's I had to miss Gloria's party, but I'm going to email her and apologize. So he, to me, was the representation of like what folks should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a broken record. Every episode I say this, but of like, you're the human before the artist. I think I can stretch this farther of like, you're the human before you're anything else. And with human, meaning like, we are human beings. It's sort of biologically in our makeup to be a community, to thrive together, right? And it's funny, I just love the phrase stuck in my mind of when you're at a workplace, and especially a 9 to 5, so many folks say like, well, it's a living, or like, I'm making a living.
Yeah.
And if we unpack that phrase of like, it's a living, we're making a living. Well, to be alive, what does it mean to be alive? And the folks that, quite honestly, even some of the characters in this piece say this, the folks that you are working with, essentially you live with too. Like, quite honestly, sometimes you spend more time at the office than you do your home space, right? The character of Lauren absolutely does, because him being in fact checking, he constantly is saying like, I'm here till overtime. I'm always the last one to leave. He basically lives there. And so there's this frustration, there's this bubble of like, there's so much chatter happening at each other, around each other, and we don't even know each other. And I just think that's it's stunning. And this is obviously just is in the playwriting, like BJJ's mapping out of this, and how Lauren is the last character we kind of get a sort of window into, and nothing really changes. Like we'll get into like breaking down each act chunk, but like nothing really changes, and he's attempting to make change, and that's kind of where our piece ends.
Yeah, like I think
Thank
Lauren.
you for coming to my TED Talk.
No, it's a good TED Talk. To me, Lauren was probably the character I latched onto the most, kind of strongly, because he was just so interesting, and dramaturgically, BJJ did something very interesting with him. That like, because we see him. He kind of is introduced as an annoyance to our main crew of characters, that they're shouting and talking and making a lot of noise, that he keeps walking back in and being like, can you please keep it down? The sound carries down the hall. And I was expecting that to almost be like a Chekhov's gun kind of thing of, oh, they're talking about Gloria. Dean's talking about how he didn't even really want to be at the party. And I thought for sure the sound carries. Gloria's going to hear this and will be upset or offended, even before I realize that she's necessarily homicidal. But like I thought that was Lauren's function. It's just this frustrated guy who's planting the narrative seed of be careful what you say because the sound carries.
Right.
And then we don't get the payoff to that, which, rightly so. It's not really what the play is about or how it's structured here. But I just thought that was like the interesting introduction we have to him. And then he keeps coming back in and he's just so tired and so frustrated and so annoyed. Like you said, he's there longer than anyone else. And on at least 3 different occasions in his Act 1 appearances, he says something to the effect of, I wish I would just die, or somebody shoot me, or...
Yep.
So then when the shooting happens, we don't see him. We don't get to find out if he made it, if he's okay. He works off stage anyway. He came on periodically, but it was from the direction of fact checking that we heard the first shots. So I was honestly expecting that, for a shooting to break out, that he would be the first character we see getting shot on stage. But no, that was actually Miles. And then Annie after that are the 2 that we actually get on stage depictions of immediate killings. But because we know Lauren is in the direction that Gloria comes from, I think we're supposed to at least assume that he was one of the casualties off stage, and almost like that's a sweet release for him, or not, because he kind of says this thing that people say all the time rather glibly, oh, just kill me already. Or, But nobody, for the most part, we don't usually mean things like when we say that. And then we go all of Act 2, Scene 1 in the coffee shop, nobody sees Lauren. He doesn't show up in that scene. He's never mentioned in the 2 conversations that we see over the course of that scene. So again, we're just kind of like reasonably assuming that he's gone and that he was one of the casualties. And then we get to Act 3 where he's our point of view character, and it is him, and we confirm right away him introducing himself as Lauren, because there's a lot of double casting. You could think for a second, oh, is he just playing someone else? But no, it's him. And he's working as a temp in this film studio and has a lot of strong opinions about them picking up Nan's script about this. Yep. And then, to not jump too heavily into the end of the play, but that we kind of end on this image of him wanting to make an effort to get to know the people he's working with, and not because, as Devin, the IT guy at the studio, says, is I'm not going to kill anyone if that's what you're worried about. Like, because, and honestly, that was my first thought when I saw that Lauren was trying to strike up conversation with this like stringy, weird IT guy.
Yeah.
That I thought, like, oh, are you worried that he's gonna, go rogue? And the way Nabil especially played Devin, characterize him as this like angry, kind of stringy, not quite the same way as Gloria, but similar, a troubled figure, like someone who we don't know what they might do. And part of me, even watching that scene, was expecting, oh, is this going to go full circle, and is the play going to end with him shooting up this studio, like him, Devin? But then, we kind of just end on this very nice moment of, Lauren took the lesson that, we work with these people, we should get to know these people, we should treat them like humans, the kind of humans first thing that you just said there. So I kind of loved his arc throughout the story, and I'm glad he is the one we got to end with.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up what you said, though, this nice ending, because I would like to not challenge that, but say it is very much a cycle. And I don't think much has changed. And let me explain that. And as I'm explaining that, I'll take us kind of through the set, because I think using the set is a good way to justify what I'm about to say. So our first act opens, we're in an office space, and the backdrop and the magazine sort of postings on the walls and all of the desks are quite angular. We're in like squares, we're in like right angles, very much like cubicle land, right? Yeah. Things are regimented. You have your own desk. You come to work, you work at your own desk. So it's very much this like North American rat race individual. You clock into work, you have your space, you do it. This is your box. This is your desk. This is your computer. This is your book, all boxed in things. And then this event happens, where you would think there would be, lesson learned as we make our way through the piece of, okay, well, in this boxed in space, we kind of were talking about trials and tribulations of the workspace and how we're not listening to each other and we're not actually getting to know each other. So then we take to the first chunk of Act 2, where we're in a coffee shop. And coffee shop, to me, I think of the phrase that is just like the societal stereotype of, hey, do you want to go get a cup of coffee? That literally means you're probably going to a cafe with someone to grab coffee. But I think figuratively what that phrase has unpacked to be is, hey, do you want to get coffee? Is, hey, do you want to go on a date? Hey, do you want to meet at this space where we can collaborate and work on a project, right? The idea of getting coffee is like this, in sort of like sets up, you are going to sit in a publicized place with another person, either getting to know them or co-collaborating or interviewing with them, right? So in the structure of the piece, we see in this coffee shop, okay, like maybe we're getting somewhere now, right? We're actually getting these like conversations happening between people. But in both, as I said, there's two conversations that happen in that section, Kendra and Dean, and then you have Sasha and Nan. And in both conversations, what I want to happen doesn't. Again, they're talking at each other. They're not listening. Quite literally, Dean and Kendra's conversation ends in this production. Dean hits Kendra in the face.
I imagine that's in all productions, but I can confirm
right now. But and they're bickering as to, like, I'm putting forth the memoir of the event, and the other one is like, no, I'm doing it, or like, so like, great, human conversation, communicating healthily with each other isn't working in this conversation. Let's pivot to Sasha and Nan, and we get their conversation, and it's very, at least from me, it was very, in this production, like white woman's Instagram kind of vibes from the very beginning, and then Sasha plants the thing of like, oh, Nan, you should do an iteration of the shooting. And We get to hear about Nan and her experience and how she is pregnant. That's another interesting detail that we could maybe unpack later. During the shooting, she was newly pregnant. And then now in this cafe scene, she's 8 months pregnant. It's 8 months have passed since the shooting. But again, it ends with this sort of like power token of like, okay, I'm going to write this thing now. And it's like, and Sasha, played by Jonelle Gunderson, her character, I remember being like, oh my gosh, this character doesn't have a lot of dialogue in this conversation once Nan goes on like her monologue. But she was like listening, and I was like, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe this is hearing, listen. But then she's the one that's like, oh my gosh, you need to fetishize this thing and make it into this like own script of your own. And I'm
she's
like,
not listening, she's scouting.
Exactly. And it's like the whole crux of like the event leads to marketing. It did not lead to properly grieving. And I think that's why we see our Dean character have an emotional breakdown in the cafe. That's why we see, we get these sort of like pivot out to the audience, opening up of their experience. And then it's like, okay, we've talked enough. And now we need to just like move. So then we get into our last section. And this workspace was so fascinating to me because it's the most modern, right? We're segueing. I don't remember exactly how
2
far.
years after the
2
shooting.
years, right.
So like a
2 years
year
after
and a
the
half
shooting.
after.
Right. And so this space is like I said, kind of more hipstery vibe. It screams community building, right? Because instead of now segue to our first act, we don't have the individual desk. We have a common central place with a warm, fuzzy blanket and a yoga ball. So that's no one's individual space. This is a community space. And then we also see the character of Callie, another character played by Jonelle Gunderson, where she's wearing yoga pants. And we have Theta Caitlin Trin, who's playing Jenna, and she's wearing like shorts, a band tee, and has tattoos. And we see Rashad, who's played by Savion Roach, has on like a pink hoodie, and he's the boss, right? So there's this like, we're open, be yourself, wear what you want, share our space. But then the end of the play, so Lauren comes in and is temping in this space, right? And kind of going back to what we had said of like, we end with Lauren wanting to get to know Devin, who's this IT folk who comes in and tries to work on to get the login information for Lauren on the computer. We see that conversation. And then the piece ends with Lauren listening to music, which is a common thread, which we'll probably unpack later. And Rashad comes in and Lauren is playing the temp or the assistant to Rashad. And 4 times Rashad tries to get Lauren's attention and missays his name. Mm-hmm. He's like Lars, Lawrence, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like so brilliant of like, it's a facade. It's a facade. And I think that to kind of get a little like humanitarian philosophical, like that exists still to this day. I think it's like, you can say that you are, all community building and have all these spaces, but like, what are the actionables, right? Like if you don't even know your employees.
See, yeah, it's
anyways,
interesting.
This is a huge.
No, I like where you're going with this. And I think it's interesting because like I had a slightly different reading of that ending because I like what you said about how, the cubicles have broken down and we're in this kind of communal space with the yoga ball and the fuzzy blanket, but there are still offices in this third set. And it's the higher ups who maybe dress in jeans and a hoodie and kind of expose their tattoos and like, look how cool and hip and young we, the employers, are. But it is still creating this like capitalistic hierarchy between, and like, I think the temp, Lauren, reaching out this olive branch to the lowly IT guy builds kind of this interesting class solidarity that separates them from the bosses who kind of want to seem down to earth and relatable, but really still are in these positions of authority. So when Rashad comes in at the end and like, I don't know your name, I didn't bother to memorize it. I still see that not necessarily as a positive thing that, oh yay, the the higher up class of employers They're still cut off from their employees, but at least the employees are building solidarity amongst themselves. Like, it wasn't really a matter of Gloria was just shooting her employers, and if only they had respected her more. She was shooting everybody.
Right.
And in fact, it's Nan, like one of the higher ups, who does survive the event because, well, for other reasons, but...
Right. And just, sorry, before we pivot, I just thought of another set component of the last image we see of when Lauren is listening to his headset. There's the photo that is above him is a sky and like clouds. So you're thinking like ethereal, dream big, but it's partitioned off in rectangles.
Yes.
So it's like 5 little rectangles of,
separate.
like
together
sectioned dreams, but together dream big. Like that to me is
together they create an image, but we don't quite let them congeal. And actually the image that kind of came to my mind, I don't think this is what it was actually taken from, but it kind of looked like the beginning of the Universal Studios logo, like when you kind of like zoom in on this cloud and zoom out to, oh, it's the Earth. Like that was actually, and because it was like a film studio, it was Flickr Studios, a fictional company, was what we were. But that was the image it created in me, like this, look at this universal unity Earth, but it's just a corporate brand logo, which I thought was interesting. And also the music. We could talk about music for days.
We can unpack music and sound, I think.
Because you did mention like that, Lauren puts on these headphones and cuts himself off from Rashad at the end. And every single act begins with listening to music. And the song, especially at the end, and like especially with headphones, is like perfect. Cut myself off from other people, but then we also have Miles mentioning in Act 1 that sometimes he just puts on his headphones and so he can listen to other people when they think he can't hear them. But I kind of want to talk about Sarah Tweed if we can. Because, because Sarah Tweed is a fictional musician who dies off stage, obviously, but dies on the day of the Gloria shooting. She wasn't at the office. Gloria doesn't kill her, but just a celebrity overdosed. Big news, and the employees of the magazine are all scrambling for the correct ways to cover this sad, early, premature passing of this very talented artist. And I kind of love, so they recorded, for this production at least, they recorded this song Glitter Witch by Sarah Tweed, and it was actually, I believe, just looking at the program here, Jonelle Sills recorded the vocals for this song. So
I believe is a relative of André. So that's
just looking at that surname, I assumed it must be because, well, it would be a big coincidence if André Sills directed this production and someone else named Sills recorded the song. But yeah, so we have this kind of like early 2000s sort of poppy kind of maybe sad, maybe like hard to even kind of pin down genre wise what we're going for here. And we have Lauren, when he kind of comes in one of his frustrated Act 1 moments, saying that he's like listening to the music and it's really getting to him and kind of like part of what's frustrating him. and it was one of the things that like when he came, they were playing it in this kind of main space, and one of the first or second times that he came on to be like, "Can you quiet down?" It was like, "Please shut off the music." And then that's the song he listens to in his headphones at the end of the play, Lauren. And I think he's like I'm not entirely sure what to make of this choice, but I kind of loved it that he is like making peace with this, and it is just the jams that he listens to. And it also comes to what you said before of this, like making a living. Like we saw him so frustrated in Act 1, so like giving his life to this job, like beaten down, kind of like, and now he's a temp. He doesn't have the responsibility or the big paycheck of the kind of head of fact checking that he has before, but he's able to just like sit in the desk, listen to Sarah Tweed, appreciate it, and just kind of chill. And I think that to me feels like the big positive ending that we're left with here, that you might still have to work and you might still be in a toxic work environment because work is toxic, but you can find ways to personally cope with it and not let it beat down your soul like we saw it doing to him in Act 1.
Putting some glitter on the witch, per se, I guess.
Exactly. Well done. What were some of your thoughts about sound or music?
Yeah, and I also wonder, like, this is probably going far into like character backstory, but I wondered if Lauren had like listened to Sarah Tweed, but if it was just because it was like the all the hot goss on the day of the shooting, because as Ryan was saying, Sarah was a celebrity that happened to OD the same day, and we actually have one of the characters say like, no one's gonna remember that Gloria shot up our office. They're only gonna remember that the celebrity Sarah Tweed died that day, you know. And so I just wondered too, like, maybe this is like a coping thing that Lauren goes through, right? Like that day or something was listening to Sarah Tweed because of events to do with Sarah's passing. And that maybe is that a way of him kind of just like, he kind of goes into the zone, or I got to listen to my Sarah so that I don't go into Gloria land too much, right? Because we don't see all of the other characters, I would argue, don't have healthy coping skills or mechanisms with shooting. They dive to the books, they dive to the memoirs, which we'll get into too. But so with sound, I felt the same way too, Ryan, of like, I'm glad we kind of unpacked Sarah because that's a common thread throughout. And kind of just going back on what you said about Miles's character, again, this is maybe veering us away from sound a bit, but something to mention. So Miles in the first act being the intern of the office, and he's described as, you know, he's like a Harvard student. He's doing this internship. He actually, like the day he wants to say thank you and goodbye to Nan, who's the head of the office, right? To kind of get a bit of goody two shoes energy, right? Get in good with the boss. But he's just like such a kind, cool dude. Like the whole piece starts with him listening to music, right? As Ryan was saying, every segment is kind of open. It's one of our characters listening to music. And yeah, he's such a kind soul. Like he, you know, he goes and gets stuff for, you know, he's a Harvard student, yet he's making the coffee rounds, right? He's making the vending machine rounds, and he doesn't care. He doesn't like sigh. He doesn't complain. And he's kind. Like you just get that, right? And like I would, Savion Roach, if you're listening to this, I would love to meet you. You seem like a really kind, awesome person. You can just like feel that energy coming off of him from the very beginning. And what's really neat too is, again, character wise, he's the youngest we have on stage, knowing that he's a student. And he's the first one we see killed on stage too. Yeah. And he's the one that
off stage before, but he's the one that dies on stage first.
Exactly. And he hasn't really gotten into like how some of the characters describe it as a bit of like a 9 to 5 vortex, or like, this isn't permanent. I got myself into this job but it's not my end game. Whereas like Miles doesn't even he's not at that level yet, right? He's still on his like career launch pad of, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. We feel that aspiration and that essence and that verve for life. And like, he is someone that I think would take a slice out of Lauren's sort of like, let's be kind to other people's pie, right? But he's the first one we see shot.
Oh yeah, and it's his last day in the office too. If the shooting had happened one day later, he would have been fine and spared. And like, I also like, another interesting detail about this character is that, well, and we don't actually get to see this because he goes into Nan's office to say goodbye, and all we hear is just like the offstage laughing. But then we hear from Nan 8 months later, her version of the story, that the very funny joke that like kind of prefaces that monologue is that, you know, there was this young intern that I spoke to in my office on his last day. His name was Mark. And like the, you know, big hilarious laughter because, you know, she's built this up as this like, oh, big important story. She doesn't even remember the name of and, you know, going to Rashad later with not remembering Lauren's name. This is a recurring theme that the higher ups don't really care enough about their employees. But then we hear from Nan telling Sasha, was it the character she's speaking to in that scene?
Yep.
Yeah, she was telling Sasha this encounter that she had and how she was expecting him to be like real suck up, goody two shoes, put in a good word for me. I really want to work here now that the internship is done. And she asked him how he liked it. And he said, it was fine, or it was okay.
It was okay.
Yeah, it was okay. And that kind of piqued her interest. Like, oh, really? And because the professor, the professor at Harvard who got him into the job, told stories in the 90s and 80s about how, like, what a crazy raunchy place is. Like, everyone is creative spurts everywhere. They're all doing cocaine all the time. And, like, he was underwhelmed by the monotony of the actual reality of what the office had become. And yes, obviously it was a different time, and I think much for the better that offices aren't still that way, but there is this, missing excitement. And then arguably the most exciting day that office has seen in a long time is, of course, Gloria. And, he pays for it with his life. But I just think it's kind of interesting, the spark of the character that is extinguished, but also it was kind of almost extinguished even before Gloria got to him. Because, he was just very underwhelmed with his experience. He just, people hand him a couple bucks, go get me a purple vitamin water from the vending machine. And they don't really have work for him to do, even though everybody's busy and everybody's frustrated. But it's just kind of, the structure of this internship is basically, you're just here, so we need to find busy work for you to do. Like, you can't. But
he's willing to do it, right? He doesn't. He never sighs, or he doesn't. He's just like, yeah, sure, absolutely, and just while we're on this sort of like character package, I want to talk about Sean, because Sean is Savion Roach's second character. That is we see, and he's the barista in the coffee shop. That's my favorite character. I think I just thought it was like brilliant, like the specificity that and the the little interchanges between all of the characters, like so well done. And here's where I kind of want to talk about movement, physicality too. Because we see all of our actors sort of change into totally different, like not all of our actors, but most of our actors that have the doubling and the triple casting, we see them fully change their appearance, fully change into their next character. And what was really stunning about the cafe section is we know it's Sean, our barista, but Sean is, the only worker in this cafe scene where we have both these conversations mentioned before, the one between Kendra and Dean, the one between Nan and Sasha, where they're both recounting events that happened the day of Gloria, or events that are happening as a result of Gloria. And obviously Miles is mentioned in both of them, I believe, or if I remember correctly, definitely in Nan's.
So I actually recall, because Kendra is writing a book about the victims. She's like, why is it always about Gloria? I want to tell the stories of the victims. So she was doing like this investigative journalism type profiling. And they did mention that she has a chapter where she interviewed Miles's family. Like, that is all we kind of get. Yes. And then when we go to Nan, she tells the story to Sasha about this, young boy, Mark, who came into my office and so they're both talking about him, but in different ways.
So so as these conversations are happening, again, brilliant direction, André, and execution, Savion, of like, we have this barista in sustained movement. So sustained meaning like slow, in sort of like slow motion, if you will. He's mopping. He's wiping down the mirrors. He's wiping that. So he's cleaning the space. He's wiping down the facades. He's keeping up the image of what the cafe is supposed to be, and also doing this in slow motion. It's almost like I caught myself watching, like listening to the conversation, hearing the conversations, and watching his sort of choreography, if you will. It was like meditative. It was like slow. But then when the idea of Miles came up in both these conversations, you have Savion, who plays Sean, who had just played Miles, sort of stop and maybe make himself more in the shot of the conversation, or stand and look on. And so I really loved that. Was sort of like, to me, like victim subtext that never gets told, right? And in both of these conversations, in that segment in the cafe, these are people who survived the accident, survived the event, and now they're sort of marketing, fetishizing, memorializing stories, which they're, we can get into that too. Like, part of that experience is their story to tell, but remembering that what they all experienced was trauma. And yes, you were involved in trauma, but those that lost their lives, do they really want their, death to be memorialized? in, you know, a marketable book or TV or film series. And so I really love that, like the subtlety of, you just saw one of our art slain characters, almost like it was like a ghostly presence. And it was like a guilt. There was like a guilt that was splattered all over that cafe. No wonder he had to be wiping it down.
Well, yeah. And like, I kind of think Sean to me was interesting because on one hand, I was seeing all the stuff you were seeing, but I also kind of felt like there was more to him that I couldn't quite unpack because like we're introduced to him. He's the first character to speak in scene 2 there. And he goes on this whole monologue about girls with Witherspoon face. And like, he's so specifically drawn this new character that we're introduced to that, you know, ghosting, casting wise, we recognize that it's Miles. And certainly when he's just in the background mopping and then looks up when they talk about Miles, we get this sense of the ghost. But I also kind of feel like, is that, I don't want to say an oversimplification, but is that, are we, and not just we, us, like I think we're intended to project this idea of Miles onto this other person that we're, you know, he's just there, he's living his life, doing his job. He's just happy to be there. He intervenes when Dean slaps Kendra and throws him out. Yep. Like, you know, he's keeping it all together. And I kind of just wonder, like, how do we negotiate the difference between this very realized new character and, oh, but he's also the ghost of this other character. And I think a lot of the double casting does this, not just him. But, and well, we might talk about some more of those in just a second. But I think Miles and Sean, it was just very interesting in this regard because he kind of has this like almost surveillance function. Like and I like what you said before about the let's go out for coffee, and that either means getting to know someone or business dealings, but it's always in public. You could just as easily say, hey, come over to my place and we'll get to know each other or collaborate. But that has this kind of like sneaky, private, behind closed doors feeling to it, where by saying let's go coffee, like Dean and Kendra have their conversation where Dean wants her to sign this like agreement where they won't write about the same thing and won't write about each other. That by putting it in this public space, it's kind of like, okay, let's, you know, hope that nothing violent happens between us, that, you know, we can settle this in public where anyone can see what we're doing. There's nothing shady going on here. And then what happens? Dean slaps Kendra and something violent does happen. The kind of very specific thing that this arrangement seems to be designed to prevent. And of course, Sean intervenes and says, get out of this coffee shop. Like, you know, please don't slap anyone in here. So I kind of think he, as this character, creates this sense of the public, almost like a Greek chorus in a way, in this scene, that he is representing the public, that we have these coffee shop meetings, you know, to, you know, be both in, but also hidden from the gaze of. And he sits right down at Dean's table before Kendra arrives and like, let's have a conversation about girls with Witherspoon face. But then the second Kendra walks in and Dean turns and they start having this like awkward conversation from across, Sean gets up and just instantly gets back to work, doesn't say goodbye, doesn't like, okay, cool, catch you later, I'm here if you need anything. Like, which it's interesting. And I 100% agree with what you were saying about the ghostliness that he brings in the scene. I just also feel like there's so much more happening there.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel like we could just unpack. And to kind of, take that unpacking torch, I want to talk about, you were saying, it's not just the sort of Miles, Sean, Rashad package. A lot of these doubling, tripling.
Let's talk about Gloria and Nan.
I was just about to say that, Gloria and Nan, because Deborah Drakeford, who plays these characters in this past production we just saw, I thought she was in the text. I would imagine off the page, it doesn't seem as obvious, but it really relies on the deliverance of the actor of whether. So as she was Nan recounting Gloria, she painted that with she knew who Gloria was, right? It was like she was kind of subtly making a nod to like, hello, I'm the same person playing, this person who's going to, arguably the piece ends where Nan gets the biggest deal out of it. And it's like, well, Nan is played by the actor who played the character who gave Nan the story to write. So it's kind of like Deborah Drakeford's story, I guess, or like, you know, or like the actor who plays those characters. That doubling is fascinating because we don't, all of Nan's stuff that happens in Act 1 is off stage. So we hear her voice, but then the character of Gloria and vocal tone, and when we finally see Nan as the play goes on, in physicality is very different. And I really liked, though, when we did get to see Nan and we knew that Gloria had passed, Deborah Drakeford's sort of a tiny glimpse into Gloria came out in Nan for me, especially in her cheat out trance-like monologue recounting the event when she's talking with Sasha in the cafe and like rubbing her belly. Yeah, it was just thrilling to kind of see it's the same actor, and they're like, there's no wig play or anything happening either. Like, it's not like, oh, I wonder who's playing this. No, it's very obvious. It's like the same hair.
The voice and physicality create a huge difference here. Like, and I think.
Well, and here's just a little thing I'm talking about, because so I mentioned this before and I just mentioned it again, but the character of Nan we find is pregnant. So in this cafe chunk, the top of Act 2, it's 8 months after the shooting, which was the day all of Act 1 was that day. And Nan is heard vomiting off stage. So I don't know, it's just like maternal instincts. After like the third or fourth time she vomits, I did have in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, she's pregnant. Like, she's pregnant. Because I'm like, she's going to this book conference or like in Scotland or something. And Dean, her assistant, is like, you know, are you gonna be okay to go? She's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm like, oh, she might be pregnant. So then when she shows up and she's 8 months pregnant with twins, which we can unpack that in a second. That alone, like, I guess, let's unpack it now, I guess. What is it? So we get in the monologue of Nan and Sasha, when the shooting happens, she's in her office with a closed door. We hear after the fact, after the shooting, that all of the editors, all of the head honchos got an email warning of the shooting happening. So they were allowed to lock their doors, find safe coverage under their desks, leaving all of the middle class office and below scrambling and running around. So there's your whole hierarchy and capitalist sort of approach thing there. But so she finds herself under a desk and stays there longer than she probably had to. And she talks about how instinctually she just grabbed her stomach. And that's when she's like, oh, she put together, I must be pregnant, like with the puking, and then her instinctually, and it was kind of like, you know, with this like she mentions sort of a little bit of like, there's sort of like an extra purpose for me to kind of stay underneath this desk and stay alive. And then we find out she's not just pregnant, she's pregnant with twins. So I don't really know if I have a fully fleshed out thought of that, but like, Ryan, like, what do you think?
Yeah, I didn't have like a lot to make of that. The pregnancy is kind of interesting because it does, like, you know, it adds stakes to her story, and like ultimately hers is the one that not only gets published but survives or like thrives, like as like her story. And I don't know, I sadly don't have a lot of thoughts about the fetus because I was so focused on these books that were gestating in the minds of the survivors as like a very interesting type of childbirth that was coming out of this, because we have the 3 book versions of events. We have Dean's, the kind of publicized survivor who was on every news clip. You know, he wet his pants, everybody saw him, so naturally, even though he had a nervous breakdown, within a week after the shooting, he already had a book deal. And, you know, HarperCollins, I believe he said, or Random House, because, you know, he didn't want to go with them, but they offered the most money, and he was in the hospital, so his agent jumped on it. And his is going to be his memoir, sorry if I'm going too much on a tangent here when you wanted to talk about babies, but
no, it's okay. We'll get back to that.
We'll get back to the babies. But yeah, this will come back to Nan, but it doesn't necessarily give an answer to the twins. But so we know that he wanted to write a memoir anyway. He had his manuscript for Zine Dreams that was all about just being a 20-something in the magazine industry and having bigger dreams. And like, that's not a story. I get that it's important to him because it's his life, but it's kind of hard to make the case for why that's going to be interesting for anybody else to read other than himself. And then sure enough, when he happens to become the public face of this big event that everyone was talking about for about 15 minutes, he instantly realizes this is what my memoir is about now. The publishers insist that the memoir is called Gloria. It's not even his life story anymore. It's just him, living through her life or the end of her life. And he has to really emphasize his relationship with her. He wasn't friends with her. He got, accidentally roped into spending a night at this party, and that happened to save his life. But because he's this poster child of the one she spared, his story suddenly seems more interesting because of that, very almost accidental relationship that they had. And then we have Kendra's book, which is, she realizes that, okay, I wasn't there. I was at Starbucks when the shooting happened, missed it by that much. So she doesn't have that firsthand experience. So her book is, I will write the survivor profiles. This is a new angle, and I can actually justify it philosophically as we focus too much on the perpetrator, not enough on the victims. What are their stories? And of course, the question is, do they want their stories told? And she is, I believe there is still sincerity to Kendra as a character. I think we're led to think of her as just this kind of opportunist Lady Macbeth type. But, when she says she doesn't drink coffee anymore, I can't imagine that's performative. I think she is genuinely has, residual trauma from this, because she does have to live the rest of her life knowing that if she hadn't gone to Starbucks, she probably would have been dead like everyone else.
Yep.
In fact, Gloria has the scene where she's kind of coming back in and out, and she's trying to take account of everybody there. Like, where is Kendra? Why aren't you editorial people ever at your desks? And then decides to still go through with it anyway because she can't wait forever. But yeah, Kendra, I think her trauma is real, but she is, certainly at this remove and able to kind of be more Machiavellian in her attempt to commodify this story than someone like Devin, who certainly is equally opportunistic. Dean. Sorry, Dean. Yeah, Devin was his other character. Yeah, Dean. Thank you. Who is equally opportunistic, but at least kind of has that a lot more firsthand experience. And then you get Nan, who was under her desk the whole time, not even actually in the thick of it. Obviously, it's still scary, and I believe her trauma is real too. But hers is the one that becomes successful. Oh, also about Kendra's, it's interesting that hers ultimately gets to be titled Gloria, because after Dean has his nervous breakdown and doesn't finish his book, Kendra usurps his title, which completely undercuts her supposed theory of we focus too much on the perpetrator, not enough. I love that detail so much.
Yeah.
And as we find out from Callie, Jonelle Gunderson's third character, who was so into all of these and read all of these books. But we finally find out that the most successful version, the one that's being optioned for film and ultimately becomes a TV limited series, is Nan's version. And she brings more gravitas to it, as Sasha tells her that, oh, you're a veteran writer, you lived through all this experience, unlike all these 20-somethings for whom this is the defining moment of their life. You have the experience that brought you here. But she's also at this remove from it, waiting, that she has the framing device for her book of just waiting under her desk, and it's mysterious, you don't know what it's about, and then flashback to all of these things. You want to
two things with there too is I was shocked finding out, because in the staging of, and I would imagine it would kind of have to be like this because the text references it when Nan is speaking to Sasha, but recounting the experience. Gloria shoots herself right outside of Nan's office, and the set itself didn't seem like there was any windows to where, but then when you hear the recounting of it of Nan, she says that she saw she sees the bodies, or she saw the bodies, or she saw the blood happening through her window. So that was a really cool, and that didn't have me go like, oh, why wasn't there a window on set? No, that was a really cool, like, extra tidbit of information, because we're made to believe, what the heck, Nan, like, you weren't even in the same room. Like, yes, like, your story counts or whatever. But then when she's like, I saw it through my window, I kind of like, as the audience, we didn't necessarily see that the office had a window, but there was, like, she saw it all happen.
But as one of the bosses, she got the tip off to lock your door.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. So she saw it through the window, but she had
and
the
bulletproof paneling windows or something like that. Yes.
So those windows that we don't get to see, but we know semiotically are there. Yes. She had the security of knowing that would protect her. So she, and while all of her employees would just get massacred outside, like.
And another detail to bring in with Nan, and again, I don't know if this is fully fleshed out, but we hear through Callie fangirling about the whole experience that Nan was pregnant, which we knew too, and is 40. So like, I think it was Callie, or maybe it was Jenna, who was saying like, and she's 40, which biologically, yes, like, once you surpass the age of like 33, they say like 35 and older for women, pregnancy there can be more risks associated with pregnancy beyond the age of 35 biologically. So I thought that was an interesting caveat too. We didn't really know, we knew that Nan was older. We knew that she was like boss, which statistically, places her older than the 20-year-olds we see on stage, but then that she's 40 and pregnant with twins, and she survives. And I would imagine she has the twins. That's another thing of like, we see her come into the space.
It's 2 years later.
It's 2 years later. Anymore. She's not pregnant. She comes in with like, like a nice, seems like a designer outfit and like sunglasses, but not that she has to, but we never hear about her kids. Did she have her kids? How did that go? We don't hear about her. That's the thing. We don't hear, we listen to like her story. We don't hear about what happens. So again, I don't know if this is like thematically just like the cycle thing happening again, right? Where it's like, okay, why don't we hear about that? The information that she shared with Sasha, like, we don't get a resolve of what's happening in her personal life. Like, we don't, once again, it's like who the person is, who the human is squelched, and the work comes first. Like I guess that's kind of what I get from that. But I don't know if you and I have a way of getting to like, why is it twins? Why? Like, no,
I honestly don't have a good answer to that.
I guess it's like two, maybe I can take a crack at it of like, you already mentioned it kind of raises the stakes. Like, a pregnancy is a pregnancy regardless. But if there's, we don't know, again, character backstory. Maybe Nan had been wanting to have children for quite some time, and then she got lucky, a little later in her life, but lucky, and not only with one, but with two. So that kind of plays into that. And then also you have this, you kind of talked really neatly about the beginning of Act 2 opening up. We hear about both Kendra and Dean's babies, right? Their memoirs, their scripts, their cherished ones. And there's two stories that were literally germinating inside of Nan through all of Act 1. And, I know I have quite a few friends who are like twins, triplets, what have you. And they are all kind of born from the same, but they're all very different, like, it's different stories, different, just because you share the same DNA doesn't mean you have the same end result in life. I don't know.
No, it is. It's good. Okay. For me, it's not necessarily, I like where you're going with the twins. Something else that just occurred to me while you're saying this is Nan, at least outwardly, doesn't go into Act 2 with the ambition of, I'm going to write another Gloria book, because she even says, like, we have so many, everybody is rushing to write their Gloria books. I'm going on mat leave. I'm like, it's not for me. And then when Sasha says, like, oh my God, how are you not writing this book, after just earlier in the act being like, everybody's writing a Gloria book. Like, when she hears the monologue, she's like, yes, you need to write the book, and I work in publishing, so of course, let me grab it up. Like, I love the other great joke of that scene, the first one being his name was Mark, and the second one being, well, I've been thinking, how much do you think I could get for it? Is the last line of that scene. So of course she has been thinking about it, and it's not really about, oh yes, I have a story to tell. It's, you really think people will buy it? Like it's in this mercantilism that's kind of motivating it. And I like that that's where we leave her in this Act 2, Scene 1, before we go into the film studio 2 years later. And then, like you say, we never hear about the children again. Because from that moment on, her baby is the book. And maybe and maybe the twins is like the book and the film adaptation that we're gonna down the line. That maybe that's twinning it. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that.
No. I love that. And also you talking about how the mercantile way of like, how much do you think I can get for it? I think maybe there also is, again, the raised stake of like, I don't have one, but 2 babies I need to like cultivate, and they need to survive. So again, it goes back to the human experience, like, oh my gosh, but like the survival of the fittest too, right? It's like, oh damn, like again, going back to like human experience of like, what do I need to do to make myself and my family or thrive, right? And so again, maybe that's what kind of turns the tune on, okay, maybe I do want to go ahead with this, but yeah, I love what you just unpacked there about it being potentially her iteration of the story on paper, and also it becoming the film. And it's like these two entities.
The idea that telling your story is like the baby, and that we don't ever see or hear about her children after that, I think is not necessarily deliberate, and we don't have to ascribe it to
and it's so interesting
intent,
that the idea of the baby, so the like pregnancy, but then also talking about how people's brain babies of like these stories, these are all like non-tactile present things. So again, going back to our boy Lauren of like, what about the people that are in front of you, the experiences that are happening now, the present, right? Like those boxes aren't checked. And I think that's a clear message that throughout the whole piece of like, there is a constant fray, a constant disconnect, a constant hiccup to get into the system, if you will. Shout out to Devin, I guess, trying to hook up Lauren's system at the end. But wow.
We've been talking for a while. There's a lot of other character pairings, but I have less to say about any of those. I don't know, so I'm happy to kind of skip over that unless you have other things you want to say about the double casting.
No, I think that pretty much summed
those were the big ones. I definitely the Miles Sean Rashad track and the Gloria Nan track were the two I think most interesting ones to unpack there. Did you have other thoughts or kind of topics you wanted to broach?
I think two more things I guess we could touch on. And I guess you can choose which pathway to open us up, but I want to talk about race in this piece.
Yes, of course.
And also I know we had discussed you talking about autobiography and like what it means to commodify stories, which we've kind of hinted at throughout, but
I would be satisfied with the conversation we've had, but there's always more we could unpack. So let's start with race, because I think we have more concrete stuff that we haven't quite unpacked yet. Would you like to kick us off with that? Or would you like me to?
You kick us off.
Okay. Well, as I said at the beginning, like BJJ is a writer who is very concerned with race, and matters of race do play prominent roles in a lot of his plays. Which is why I think, one might go into this play just seeing his name and expecting it to be, it's a parable for race in our time. And it's not. And like, while there is, I think race does play some factors in it. What I want to actually kind of point out, having the script now here in front of me, the specific racialized casting prompts that are given like for the characters here. Because so Dean and Devin is extra late 20s white is the description we get for him or them. Kendra and Jenna is mid to late 20s Chinese American or Korean American. So some kind of Central Asian there. Then we have Annie, Sasha, and Callie, who are early 20s white. Then Gloria and Nan is an interesting one because that's extra late 30s, anything really. And I think that's like, we can unpack that. Let me just finish going through the list and then we can get through. Then we have Miles, Sean, and Rashad, 20 years old, black. And that I think is very clear from the way these characters are used throughout the play. And then Lauren, late 30s, unclear. So we have very concrete racialized casting for Dean and Annie are white, Kendra is Asian, Miles is black, and all of the characters that are paired with him. But then we have Lauren as unclear, and we have Gloria/Nan as anything really. So what were your thoughts on that?
Okay, so first thing that jumps out at me is the Gloria Nan description of anything really, because I think that totally could change the lens of this piece. Like we see in this iteration, Deborah Drakeford, who is white presenting, play Gloria and Nan. So she is our killer oddball in the office of Act 1, and then she's the character that sort of makes it in the end, or becomes like a publishing celebrity, I guess, if you will. And so we see like the varying scales of white womanhood, I guess, through Deborah Drakeford's performance. But I think if that character pairing, Gloria and Nan, were played by an actor of color, I think that could totally change the lens of this piece. Possibly through the lens of Gloria, is there more like a stereotypical ostracizing of this employee in the workplace, which I think is very realistic to our workplaces to date. And is there more of a concern or a pathos to that character? And then as we see the same actor playing Nan in the second act, again, is there more of a pathos and a sort of wanting Nan to succeed? What about you? What did you feel?
Like you're unpacking some interesting stuff here. I kind of, while I'm open to, BJJ and his infinite wisdom allowing different opportunities for, considering who he will cast in this paired role, I kind of love that we had a white Gloria. Gloria specifically, we'll get to Nan in a second, because they are obviously two sides of the same coin. But I feel like you're absolutely right. This would be a very different piece if we had a Black Gloria or a Latinx Gloria or an Asian Gloria. But, like, the way I see it, I cannot picture a version of the post-massacre discourse surrounding this event in the play that, if it's anyone but a white person, where that discourse would be about anything other than race. Because that's just the society we live in. Like, think of the O.J. Simpson trial. Like, sure, it was a big deal for a lot of reasons. He was a very famous athlete and movie star, but at the end of the day, it became so deep entrenched about race because it was a trial about a Black man killing a white woman, his white wife, literally Othello. Like, and, race becomes just a part of the discourse, and it polarized people on so many different lines that I think the conversations that happen in Act 2 and 3, or Act 2, Scene 1 and Scene 2, would be a lot more about race, especially from the white characters who talk about it, if there was that dimension to it. It's almost kind of utopian to think about keeping those lines exactly the same as they are, but with a Black, possibly, or any kind of BIPOC Gloria, that like these conversations would probably be so different. And when I do think about the kind of like, we very tragically live in an age where these kinds of mass shootings happen all the time, the perpetrators usually are white. Like we hear a lot in like the kind of punditry about these things, about these like lone wolves, that when a person of color commits an act of violence like this, so they represent the community and they stand in, but when a white person does it, they're a lone wolf acting alone, isolated from society. And I do think Gloria certainly fits that media narrative more so than, what the media apparatus would have turned this story into if she was anyone else. So I would be very curious to see those alternative productions and see how they handle it. And maybe there's just different undercurrents in the line deliveries, or maybe BJJ would give license to rewrite some lines accordingly. I don't know. I would be very curious to see it, but I think certainly, like in the casting that André went with in this production, I feel like going with a white presenting performer definitely was strong there. And then to the flip side of that coin being Nan, what would it mean to have a person of color playing Nan? Well, I like the idea of this kind of, bringing back to the Top Girls discussion, this girl bossification of like, I'm winning being a white woman, because that kind of, white feminism does leave a lot of people out of the margins if you don't integrate it intersectionally. But I also kind of think that it's this lack of like intersectional awareness could also make it interesting if a person of color ascended to those ranks and then forgot all of the little people beneath them. So there's definitely avenues there, but I think it's making the Gloria character white in particular is what sells this type of casting for me.
Yeah, I think so too. I would agree. Like, and kind of just going back to the shootings we see on stage of Gloria shoots Miles, but then she shoots Annie and twice. So that's a stage direction too that I know is in, because we had a chance to glance at the playwright, but like Annie gets shot and then you audibly, and Jonelle Gunderson performed this creepily, stunningly, but you hear her gasping for air, like it wasn't a kill shot. And then Gloria makes sure that she is killed by shooting her twice.
Yeah, and Dean has the line later on about like, do you, Kendra, remember, or are you haunted by the sound that Annie made between the first and second shots? Because I am.
Yeah. And so that to me, again, just kind of going back to unpacking it from it being in this iteration, like Gloria and Ann played by a white identifying actor, of like, you see Miles, our Black character, get shot, but then right away, it's literally like she swivels, pivots, shoots Annie, who is a white female as well. So I think to me in that scene, it was very like we saw like Gloria, an element of Gloria's character, that she was on a rampage. Like she just had on her pre-programmed red dress, which up until then the character had been in a trench coat.
Yeah.
And that was already kind of concerning maybe, or raising some flags, but we kind of knew that she was the office oddball. So it was like, maybe this is just how she wants to dress. But then we see her coming out in a red dress, which I thought was, this is going a little bit on tangent, brilliant, because when these gunshots are fired on stage, there are no like blood packs. There's no like, as the audience, we're not seeing prop blood, we're not seeing the visualization, but to have Gloria in a red dress walking in, and red being symbolism of like revenge and bloodlust, and also paired with like romance. It was a really good, great costuming choice there. But yeah, so kind of, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but going with like right away, you see it's just she's just clearing out what she wants to clear out. There isn't really any specific target, except folks that maybe were rude to her or didn't go an extra mile to acknowledge her. And that race doesn't play a part in that.
Yeah. And I think, like, to me, yeah, I agree that it doesn't seem to be a target. The only non-target is that I will spare Dean because he was nice. And
well, like, technically, she probably spared Lauren as well. Because we know that she was in fact checking, and Lauren works there. And actually, I was going to talk about this too, and we broke this down earlier, of like, we don't know if Lauren is, I remember thinking Lauren didn't get shot, because we got that conversation of Lauren being like, oh yeah, I'm going to email Gloria. So I automatically thought Lauren, if Dean's being saved, Lauren's also being saved. And then what do you know, when Lauren pops up, I'm like, yeah, I don't think he would have been shot.
See, my thinking with that is textually, when in Act 3 or Act 2 scene 2, when we see Lauren again in the film studio, he gives the explanation to, I believe it was Callie he was talking to, about his recollection of that day. And he says, he just saw people running, so he ran too, and that's why he's like, there's more than 18 people in this office, a lot more survived. Like, I would like to think that if Lauren did have a similar experience to Dean, that would have either been dramatized or recounted in some kind of way. So the fact that his version of events that's never contradicted is that I saw people running, so I ran too. Again, I would like to think that Gloria would have.
Yeah.
But we just will have no way of knowing, because Gloria is no longer here to tell us. And
BJJ, you're such a good writer, and André Sills, you are brilliantly putting this on our stages. Wow.
Yeah. What a wonderful piece that can stimulate so much interesting ideas.
Well, we've been talking about it for about an hour and a half.
Yes. Did you have any kind of last thoughts, topics? Did you want to unpack the morality of commodifying people's lives and tragedies and traumas in your own memoirs, or have we beaten that horse a little too much already?
I think just kind of, putting a final hem in the conversation of like, yeah, this whole piece is a satire essentially on like the real, raw, visceral jungle that is our workplace. And this is a common phrase that's filtered throughout, rehearsal spaces and hopefully more workplaces. And I know schools and stuff too, but kindness is key, or always be kind, or choose kindness, and like, yes, can we do that? Because like even the smallest gesture of like showing up to someone's party or asking someone for a drink could change their current mood, which that can have a domino effect to change their outlook on themselves or other folks. And this is kind of me, I guess, standing on a bit of a soapbox at the end of this convo, Ryan, but how I think that's the main message to chalk home here is we need to break out of our cubicles and like genuinely be present in our workplaces with ourselves and with our coworkers, especially as we pivot back into the jungle post pandemic. And and like a little kind gesture goes a long way. And if it's not, we see a lot of crumbling, breaking down of space, of human. So that's kind of where I want to pin it, I guess.
That feels like a pretty good, appropriate note to end on, and I'm happy to leave it there.
Okay. Well, like we sort of unpacked, if you've made it this far with us, and maybe
you've already seen it by this point, because we just spoiled everything.
But if you hadn't, I still think definitely put yourself in, put your butt in a seat to see this production. It's brilliantly done. Even if you just go for, to put images we did give really good descriptions of the set, but if you want to see it for yourself and see the absolute stunning cast work, brilliant direction, phenomenal playwriting, that is Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. And I'm so happy that this had its Canadian premiere. And
we can't praise it enough.
To seeing more works like this put on our stages. But for now, I want to say again, be kind to each other and stay safe and stay healthy. And we will catch you next time.